Hi, you guys, and welcome back to the podcast.
We are the Karwells.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Sarah, and we are, as you know, Airbnb interior designers and investors. All right, welcome back, everyone, to Catch Up with the Karwells. Today, we have a very special guest coming on named Lauren Sedlar. Welcome to the show.
What's up? How are y'all?
Good, how are you?
Doing all right. Thanks.
Good. Okay, so we met Lauren probably about a year ago at a conference, a HostCon conference held by Rob Built, if you guys are familiar with him. And we hit it off with Lauren immediately. Ended up sitting at the same table, and now we've just been flirting on social media with each other for the last several months, and kind of have plugged into each other's journeys a little bit along the way. And so Lauren has been a wealth of knowledge. She's been so much fun to follow on social media. And so now we want to just dive deeper with her and pick her brain a little bit more. So Lauren, for those who may not know who you are already, will you give everyone just kind of a background of who you are, what you do, and what your portfolio looks like currently?
Yeah, sure. Well, what's up, you guys? My name is Lauren. I'm located in Houston, Texas, and my background is actually in the corporate world. I came from working for a Fortune 500 company, Frito-Lay, throwing chips all day long for 5 years and managing the people that did so. And so came from the corporate world and transitioned into real estate back in 2021. Long story short, I hired a mentor, got started in the Airbnb space, and within a month of being up and running, I opened my first 2 Airbnb properties here in Houston. Through the rental arbitrage method, which is where you rent a home and then re-rent it out to guests as opposed to buying the homes. So that was how I got started in the real estate space. Since then, I've scaled my portfolio to 6 homes, all located here in Houston. I work with other investors to help them build out their portfolio in addition to mine. And now I just get to chit chat with people like Sarah and Em and, just pick their brain and build a community around the real estate space.
Amazing. Well, I love that you're in Houston. I lived there for 4.5 years. I went to the University of Houston. So I'm well aware of what Houston has to offer. But
Yes.
I wanted to ask, why did you choose arbitrage out the gate? Because there's obviously many different strategies to get into short-term rentals. So what was it about arbitrage that was like really enticing for you from the very beginning?
When I worked at Frito-Lay, I made between like $60,000 and $70,000 a year. And although like that's a livable, like, it's livable, right? I didn't have the entrepreneurial mindset that I have now. And so I spent like 100% of what I made and more, racked up a lot of credit cards debt, just going and blowing, right? So when it came time for me to think about like other options for myself, I didn't have a savings. I had tried. My first business venture was a tequila company. And so like any additional income that I wasn't blowing on like trips and food and just stuff went towards the tequila venture. And so rental arbitrage for me was something, one, that was like a very quick start, right? I was so new to real estate. I didn't know how to buy a home. I didn't know what, like basic tax knowledge was. I didn't have any of that knowledge. So for me, rental arbitrage was a very quick way to jump into real estate and get started with very little money. My very first property was a 3-bedroom, 3.5 bath home in Houston, and the rent was $3,000. So I had to have the $3,000 for the first month's rent and the security deposit. That's it. That's the only cash I had to have. And luckily I had saved up that amount of money. And that was about it. I think I had like an extra $1,000 after I, got that first property. Everything else went on business credit cards. So, for someone who just like didn't have a big savings, it was a pretty easy, straightforward way to get started in real estate.
I love that. And I love that you're able to scale quicker in the arbitrage game at the very beginning specifically.
Yep.
I totally skipped over the Airbnb horror story. So because you were able to scale and you have 6 properties, I'm sure you have some Airbnb horror stories. So could you tell us yours?
Yeah, no, it's okay. It's kind of a good transition because we were just speaking about my very first property, which I opened in November of 2021. And that property is you're familiar with Houston. It's in the East downtown area, which is a very gentrified area, right? And so with that, well, I guess this could happen anywhere, but it's not the best area of Houston, I guess you should say. And it was around like the Christmas time frame. So the property had only been up maybe a month, not even. And I was sitting at a nail salon, getting my nails done, watching the TV, and it's a bit vulgar. I'm watching a shootout happen, and I see my townhome, like literally on the TV. And there's a gentleman running down the street in front of my townhome, and it's like showing the exchange of fire, and a bullet actually went into my townhome in the exchange of fire. And luckily the guests were not there. The windows were double paned. It went through the half bath, like on the staircase, so like most importantly, no one was at the home when it happened, right? But yeah, that was probably like, and blessing, like you have like horror guests and great guests. This guest he was like too okay with the situation. He was like, Lauren, the street's like taped off with like, like the caution crime scene tape. Hope everything's okay. Like, let us know if you need anything. And I'm like, are y'all good? Are y'all good? He didn't leave me a bad review. So he had a 5-star review. Like, it was a blessing in disguise, but that was definitely like the most like, oh my God, I just started my venture and a bullet has came into my home, right? That was by far the most like, not traumatic, but it was just like, wow, like it could have been so much worse scenario. I actually lost that property like 3 months later. I didn't know at the time to check the deed restrictions of the property. And the deed restrictions actually restricted short-term rentals. And so, unfortunately, I was only in that home it wasn't even a full 4 months. And so you can imagine just now starting your first property and losing it. Like I really could have just like crumbled and folded then, but I didn't. I'm a hustler at heart. I turned and found another property within a week and had movers move all of that stuff into the new home. So lots of stories with that first property, even though I had it for only like 3 or 4 months. It was my learning baby.
Yeah. That resonates in so many levels. And it's so similar to kind of the beginning of my journey with arbitrage, where I invested in a gentrifying area where it was like nice condos, really crappy condos, nice condos, really crappy condos in the heart of Dallas. So it's like same exact scenario, but mine was a 1-1. And as like everybody has heard the story about that property getting completely robbed at some point in time. But after I had completely refurnished the already completely robbed apartment, I had the same or a similar situation happen where no one complained during the stay. Like the guests checked in, everything was fine. Like, and we had units on both sides of this specific unit that I'm talking about. And so like none of the guests in the other units complained to us all night long. And then the next day we walk into the unit and there's a bullet hole through my bathroom door. And I don't know, like they didn't complain, no cops were called. Like I to this day don't know how that happened. But then we like reached out to the guests and we were like, you're gonna have to pay for this like bullet hole that's in this door. And they were like, oh yeah, okay. Like very like we didn't ask, they didn't say, they just like sent the money for the door and we moved on. But I was just like, I don't know what I almost got into there, but we're not even gonna dig into it.
Maybe they were just like cleaning their gun and it was an accident. Let's hope that was the case.
It is Texas, so that could be the case.
Right.
We could give them the benefit of the doubt. That could be the case. I do love that did not deter you. Obviously, within that 4 months, you saw proof of concept and you're like, okay, this is it. This is the thing that I'm in and I'm running with it, which is so good because the reality is stuff like that is going to happen, especially depending on the markets that you're in, like cities, stuff like that just kind of happens.
It does. And I mean, you guys can relate to this. Like, I'm sure you can. This entire business venture has taught me how to deal with things that happen in life so much better. Like I was just in Yellowstone with my mom and my property manager called me and told me that that the gas company had busted a gas line behind our property, and like gas was like not just like like loud blowing outside of the property, right? And the area was being evacuated. And I was just like, all right, did you like tell the guests to leave? Like, you know, let's help them find another property. And I'm just like very calm and collective about it. And my mom's just like, hang up the phone, and she's like, it really is always something. And I was like, yeah. And I only have 6 properties. Like, it is always something, but it's taught me a really hard life lesson that I needed to learn, and that shit happens and how to just deal with that shit. And I am such a stronger, better person today than I was 2 years ago. I used to get frazzled about everything.
So did we. That is preaching the choir there. Emily and I talk internally all the time about how our capacity for bullshit has just gotten so much bigger. It's like, you know, even when we do go through all these situations that are horrible situations where our feelings are hurt, we're offended, we're frustrated, or whatever the case may be, it's just like, first and foremost, response is solution oriented. Like, you can't get stuck in this like situation of feeling bad for yourself because no one cares.
Right.
Like, literally no one cares.
And I was definitely like, that's how my mind operated, is like everything was a really big deal. Everyone should care about everything that's happening to me. And I'm like, no, I wasn't solution based. I was like very much just like, I bitched about things, you know, like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. Now I'm definitely not like that. And I think I'm into this for that. So glad you can relate to that. I love how you said it. Our tolerance for bullshit is like, mine's just like extremely high now.
Definitely
Not
is.
surprised.
And
Like,
it's
oh, the property's not on fire? Okay, then we're good. And
Yeah.
it is like, did they get out?
It's a definite mindset shift when you have to go into this industry. When you become the boss, you're like, every problem ends with me. So you can't react, like have a big reaction to every problem, because
Right.
all of them are coming to you. So.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good way of saying it, actually.
Joy in the chaos, I suppose. And I always tell Emily, I'm like, that's why we have each other, because misery loves company.
Yeah, I'm glad that you guys have each other, because I mean, I've built, you know, people like you guys to where like I can call and have those kind of conversations, because it just makes you feel better, I guess, for someone to relate with like what's actually going on, and the fact that you are having to be so strong and deal with so much stuff. You know, it's a skill I had to learn. It didn't come natural to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I want to shift gears a little bit here and talk about your arbitrage portfolio, and specifically your ability to negotiate deals with landlords.
Yeah.
I know that this is something that people get really stressed out about. And, you know, myself included, like when I first started in arbitrage in Dallas, I didn't even ask the landlord if it was okay. I didn't even know you had to ask the landlord. Like, that's how naive I was at the beginning, where I was like, oh, like if I'm paying rent, why would anyone care? Like, I didn't even know that there were like lease regulations and like subletting had rules and so on and so forth. So when you did that first round of mentorship, is that where you learned how to negotiate it? And then talk through kind of your process of finding landlords, negotiating the deal. What does that look like?
I had so right after Frito-Lay, I took a job, real quick story. I took a job with a tax firm, and I was making a lot of money with that tax firm, but I was working like 14, 16-hour days. And so I didn't have a lot of free time to like digest information. But what I would do is I was stacking cash in the background, right? And I would come home after that tax job, and I found a couple people on YouTube. Horror was actually one of them. And I just started like mass consuming information on how to go about getting into Airbnb. Not even Airbnb arbitrage, really just like Airbnb, but Airbnb arbitrage was something that I learned about. Not to mention I came from a sales background, so I kind of like had those negotiating skills. It was just like part of who I was. But I understood that through like learning from other people. I understood a few tactics that I could say, like persuasive methods, right? Negotiation methods, in order to convince a landlord that like I am the better option. And obviously I've crafted that skill as I've dealt with more landlords and dealt with like the no's and the why they don't want to allow that. And so it's a combination of like yes, some things I learned throughout the mentorship, but mostly just like life, my sales background, and then digesting all that information off of YouTube from other people who are already in the Airbnb space and had already been doing rental arbitrage and Airbnb in general.
Yeah. And so I know one thing that people are really nervous about when getting into arbitrage, and something that like we tell people to negotiate maybe into their contracts, is longer lease times, because a lot of times your landlord is going to see how much you're making, or they're going to see proof of concept, and then they kind of pull the rug out from under you. So when you're going into those negotiations, how do you have those conversations to kind of set yourself up to be like, I'm going to be in this as long as possible? Because when you're fully furnishing these things, you're putting a pretty penny into them, especially when you're arbitraging homes. So you want to be in them as long as possible without having that extra hand in the pot, but there always is the extra hand when you have a landlord. So how do you approach those conversations?
My very first lease, so in full transparency, I won't sign anything less than a 4-year lease. When I first got started, I didn't have that mindset. I knew that I needed to at least sign a 2-year, because it was going to take me about a year, like 14 to 16 months to pay off my debt, my initial investment. As you said, like you dump quite a bit of money into furnishing these homes, especially a larger home like I took on, right? So looking back, I probably should have even signed a longer lease then, but I was just happy someone was letting me rent their home. I signed a 2-year lease with that landlord. Obviously it didn't last long, but let's fast forward to like what I've learned and how I negotiate longer leases now. Because like I said, I'll sign as long as a lease as a landlord's comfortable with. The most I have is a 4-year lease. And now I'm like, okay, I'm not even going back from a 4-year lease. I know I can lock down a 4-year lease, so it's only longer from here. But what I do is I let the landlord know that, hey, here's my portfolio of homes. I have a proven track record of paying rent on time. I take care of the properties. I'll even offer to like take a landlord to see some of my other homes now, and like, hey, we've been in this home for 2 years, a year and a half, a year, whatever it is. Look how it looks. Like, obviously we take care of these properties. So just reassure them that, I care, right? These homes are not just being trashed by Airbnb partiers. And so just showing them our portfolio, having them talk to other landlords. I'll set up like calls and be like, hey, why don't you hear firsthand from another landlord that I've been working with and see like what he has to say about our relationship. And so that really does help them ease their peace of mind, and that they're going to be working with someone for a long period of time that's a trustworthy person. And why wouldn't they want that? Why wouldn't they want the steady income from a property for a long period of time? Like, they can just sit back and coast and collect money for the next 4 years from someone who's a trustworthy person. That seems like an ideal situation to me. Like, doesn't it to you? So that's what I've used. Those are a few different tactics that I've used to lock down some of these longer leases. And what I tell people, they're always like, okay, well, you have a portfolio to like turn to and show. What if I don't? And I'm like, okay, fair enough. Have you been a renter before? Like, have you rented personally? Have you rented an apartment before? Most people to some extent have rented a home or an apartment for some period of time. Put them in contact with the person that you've rented from, like, hey, I paid rent on time. I was a good tenant. There's got to be some kind of like referral that you can turn to and be like, hey, let's see, this is the type of person I am. Hear it directly from this person, right? That's collected money from me for a long period of time.
I think that's genius. I don't know that I've ever heard anybody say that they're actually getting like the landlords in contact with each other.
Yeah.
Maybe like having a letter written, but like actually setting it up so that they can know that they can trust you. I think that that's super genius. I do want to touch on one thing, and I know, I'm sorry, Sarah, I'm taking all the questions. You can have your questions in a second. But we talked about putting a lot of money into these properties, and because they're arbitrage properties and it's not something that you get to just decide whatever you want to do in the property, how do you negotiate that? Because you are in a market where there is a lot of competition. So in order to stand out, design has a lot to do with that. So how do you negotiate or talk to your landlord about like painting walls or wallpaper? How do you make sure that you're still standing out amongst the competition when you might be a little limited on what you can do?
Yeah, I'm always like envious of you guys' projects, because those are things that like aren't necessarily, I mean, I haven't even approached my landlord about like building things out in the home, like building a coffee, area or a bar area, and like nailing stuff into the wall. Like, I'm very cautious with that type of stuff, because if it was my home, I'm trying to do as little damage to these properties as possible. Like you said, all while standing out. So I've just I've turned to a lot of like renter friendly. Like my TikTok is flooded with, cute girls decorating their apartment. They're like, I'm over just living in an apartment for a year and not making it feel like a home. Like these are renter friendly things that I do, even to the point where like rehanging blinds, to where like the point is that I've found a lot of renter friendly tactics that can make the property look really nice. The last property I had, I do wallpaper, peel and stick wallpaper. And most of the properties, like an accent wall. So instead of painting it, which I guess I could paint it, right? You can paint a wall and then paint it back whatever the other color. But I do a lot of peel and stick wallpaper because it adds like so much pop, right? Like it's not just a plain solid wallpaper. It has like design and stuff on it. So it just adds a lot more than like a solid color paint would. And then just other renter friendly tips and tricks that I've used. I found these peel and stick. Have you guys ever been to a hotel that has like those floor to ceiling curtains that you can just like pull and move? Like it's like they're on like a tray, like a track, excuse me. I just tried those out on my last property and now I'm like, okay, I'm never going back. But it's not invasive into the wall. It like peels and sticks to the ceiling like the track does. I don't know. It's just like getting creative and finding renter friendly things that, may not be as built out like yours may be, but it still is like a little bit different. You know what I'm saying? And then just finding those properties. Some of these, even though they're like, basic single family homes, some of these nicer homes do have like those accent walls with the wood, the strips of like thin strips of wood that are painted or whatever. Like some of these nicer properties do already have that. And so, hey, that's even better for me. That's less work on my end, right? So those are some things that I've done.
That's amazing. I think both in you talking through your process of securing landlords and properties and your process of bringing these properties to life, it's like we're presenting you with problems and you're immediately hitting us with like, okay, yes, that is an issue that I'm hitting, but here's the solution to follow it. And like, it's brilliant, right? So we talk through that with all of our mentees and we talk through that with people who have had a lot of success in this Airbnb space around just the fact that they are so solution oriented and they're looking at like, at the end of the day, nobody starts with the same deck of cards, right? Like right. I have a dad who is a builder and a GC. Like that's a huge advantage for me, right? But, everybody's got different advantages, different cards in their pocket. And so you're looking at it and you're saying like, okay, yeah, I don't have a portfolio of properties to like show a landlord that I've done this 16 times, but I have rented in the past and been a great tenant, right? That's like, giving lemons and making lemonade. And so I think that like, if you don't have that spirit on your side, like entrepreneurship in general likely isn't for you.
Absolutely.
But if you do have that, then it's like, name the problem.
We'll figure it out. Yeah. And that just goes back to like what we started talking about when we first started this conversation, is that wasn't always a strength of mine, but it's something that now that we're even talking about it, I'm going to give myself even a little bit more credit for, because that is something that not everyone has the ability to do. Like they fold and they crumble when a problem or like a not ideal situation is presented to them. And that is entrepreneurship to a T. Like there is no rule book. You are writing that rule book. You're figuring it out. So yeah, it's crazy that I never thought this really was never me. And now it is me. And I'm like, go me.
Go. Seriously. Well, and there's one other thing that I want to touch on that was, we were talking about a hair before we talked about the design components of renter-friendly spaces, is the deal process or the deal flow that you've gone through, for these landlords. Like, you're talking a little bit about how you're like, okay, well, I got a 4-year lease. Now I'll never do anything below a 4-year lease. Yeah. I think that a misconception that I had at the beginning that now I'm like, whoa, this is totally different than I ever anticipated, is that there is no rule book for the deals. Yeah. And everybody's at a different point to say yes or no to different deals, right? It's like the original deal you made with the original landlord that was 2 years that ended up only lasting 4 months. Like you probably look back on that deal and you're like, I would never do that again, right? Yeah. Like, but I learned a ton. Yeah. And every single deal you get better and you get better and you get better, but you really are, one, in control of the deal, and two, making it up. Like there is no basis. Right. There is no baseline.
I think people are just so nervous to, like, you have to have a bit of like, grit to you to know that like you're not going to know everything. Like things aren't going to go exactly the way that they should go. Like I just lost another property. We ended a year early in our lease because like the neighbors just were not happy that I was doing Airbnb in the home. And so HOA didn't have rules and restrictions when I moved into the property, but the committee came together and created those rules and restrictions while I was there. And like just talking about like how like navigating unforeseen waters, when I went into that lease, luckily I had already, someone else that I knew had gone through a similar situation to where like the landlord by choice chose to end the lease early with this tenant, or like requested to end the lease early. And so I knew then to add that into my leases to where like, if it wasn't by choice that I have to end the lease early, right, then there's going to be some kind of compensation here, because how I structure the leases is, okay, cool. Let's say I can no longer do short-term rentals. I still have the option to do midterm or long-term rentals in the home, right? This lady wanted me out completely. She was like, no, like, I just think the neighbors like this, just, it's not a good situation anymore. And I'm like, okay, well, per our lease, then if you're requesting to break it and there's no like true reason as to why we're breaking it, it's just you don't want me here anymore, there's going to be a payout. And that was in the lease. And I'm a nice person. So she was supposed to pay out the rest of the lease, which would have been like 30 grand. And I was like, look, we'll settle on half. I know that these neighbors have put you through hell. Like, you know, like I'm just a good faith, good, whatever. Call me silly, call me stupid. I split half with her. She paid me 15 grand and I got out of the home in a week. Right. But like, had I, like, you never know. Like you just learn as you go through these different things. And thank God now I know that every lease I need to have some kind of like payout system in it. Right. Like, you just learn as you go, and it's never going to be perfect, right?
That's such a smart thing to put into your lease. That's so genius, because like you said,
Yeah.
regulation, it is just a part of our industry, right? Like we have people ask us that for purchasing homes all the time. They're like, what if regulation changes? Sorry, that's just part of it. If it's not there when you get into it, great. You make some money on the property and then you have to adapt from there. But having that in your lease is so smart to have that from the very beginning, because then you're covering your ass, and if it doesn't happen, then it doesn't happen and you get to write out your lease. But if it does, 15 grand, I'd take that, even if it is half of what she owed you.
Yeah, I was just like, oh my God, these neighbors have put this lady through like hell, you know, and I feel for that, you know, and I believe in like good things come back around. So I was like, look, I need money to like, I'm going to have to store this furniture somewhere. You know, like you're asking me to get out on a whim. The business, like how I put food on my table for my family, is now coming to a stop with this property, you know? So like work with me here, you know, like, and I mean, we did. So yeah.
Ooh, I love it. It's one of those things where like when you're coming off of a 9 to 5, I mean, you were in sales before, so you know, you talk about how like negotiations and sales kind of came naturally to a certain degree to you.
Yeah.
And then you step into this entrepreneur ring and you have to like wear every hat. And so that was not a skill that Emily and I had in any capacity. Like negotiating, it's like, what do you mean I can like think about what I want, like what a win looks like for me? Like, what do you mean somebody's not going to just like hold my hand through these situations and like tell me like left or right? And so that has been such a mindset shift where like all of a sudden now you are the deal maker and you have to understand what a win looks like for you, and nobody else is going to advocate for you. And it's like negotiations on every single front, right? It's negotiations with landlords, with investors, with designers, with boots on the ground, with everyone, every single angle. You're just like shaking hands and kissing babies and making moves and like you have to be comfortable with it, but it definitely is a learned skill over time.
That's why I
you
try to
can't
tell people, I'm like, look, if you're going to try to do something like this yourself with no kind of like background, it's not that I think you can't do it. I have full belief that you are capable of starting an Airbnb yourself. It's that the knowledge that someone has been doing it and the bullshit that they've been through, like you can save and make, you can save money, save time. You can make more money. Like I just made the $15,000 from breaking the lease early, right? Like those are things that if you're just coming into it, it's not that hanging a picture frame and setting up a bed and taking pictures and posting a listing on Airbnb is hard. It's that knowledge that the person that's been doing it like you and I have, right? Like to me, that's what you're paying for. I'm big on mentors now. I'm big on like communities. I'm big on all of that because it just saves you so much time, right? Like you're paying for the knowledge that the person has, the knowledge and the experience that that person has gained, right? In the time frame that they've been doing it. So
Yeah. Yeah, you're buying their 10,000 hours for sure.
yeah.
So you talked a little bit about that at the beginning of this, where you said you immediately out the gate when you were still working for Frito-Lay, you decided to hire a mentor.
Mhm.
Is that like, how did you, because Emily and I did not, and that was a mistake that we made. We like tripped over ourselves and we're running around like little baby deer on ice for like the first 2 years, right? We're just like, didn't have it together. So
Yeah.
was that something that you learned from Frito-Lay, that you need a mentor, or like how did you end up deciding to go down the mentorship route right out the gate?
I think a lot of that credit is owed to the guy I was dating at the time had just bought a course to learn how to do wholesaling. And so he had just spent the last maybe 6 or 7 months going through that. And I guess saw the value clearly that that type of system, mentorship course gave to him. And so he had already been putting in my head, hey, what are you doing? What are you going to invest in? What are you going to build out? I had at that time an event planning company, and I still do. So I help communities plan events for their residents. And so I already knew that, and he already knew, right, knowing me, that I enjoyed the side of things where you put something together for another person to enjoy. I got that fulfillment from the events. He saw me do the events. It was something that just brought me joy and happiness. And he had came across a video on TikTok one day where this gentleman, the guy that I ended up hiring as my mentor, did rental arbitrage. And he was like, Lauren, I think that you may like something like this. You already like putting things together. Now, instead of putting events together, you can put spaces together. You like traveling. It's where we spend most of our money, right? Why don't you incorporate the two and look into this Airbnb thing? You don't have to buy the home. It was just this aha. And it was just from a TikTok video. And so he sent me that TikTok video, and that's kind of that kind of got my wheels turning of okay, you know what? I don't have an investment for myself. I am just making a 9 to 5 and then just blowing all that money. I haven't actually started building wealth in the background for myself. And so that's, I guess, just his experience from a mentorship / coaching program helped me, get into that really and be okay, some kind of proven concept like this works, even though I'm not going to be doing wholesaling. I want someone to help me out. And I reached out to that guy and submitted an application, and it was $15,000. And I wired it the next day, and I was like, holy shit. I just wired $15,000 to someone. I had never done anything like that before. Never. But that just goes back to my impulsive behavior that plays to my advantage at times. I pull triggers. I'm like, yeah, hell, let's do it. Let's do it. I've always been like that. So I think that did help. I'm not that oh, what if this doesn't work? I don't know. If you don't have that, I can see it being very challenging, right? If you're fear-based, was it risk adverse? Is that what it's called?
Yes. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, Emily and I had that same oh my gosh moment at the beginning of this year when we finally hired our first mentor, and we paid him 25 grand. And it was before we paid him 25 grand, I was just like, Emily, this is a down payment on a house. We are saying no to another property in this portfolio to hire someone to walk us through something that we don't know if we're going to see an ROI. We've never done something like this. We've always been scrappy, but what if this 25K helps us skip forward 3 years in our business? What if, right? It's is the ROI there? Is the potential ROI there? Is the risk worth the reward? All of those questions go through your head, but now that we're on the other side of it, we're now okay, who else do we have to pay to get to the next step?
Yeah, it's honestly amazing what putting money behind something, it'll kick you in the ass. It's oh no, I've been talking about wanting to do this for how long? Sarah and I talked about doing what we've been doing this past year for so long. And then we were like, no, we'll build it out later. We'll build it out later. Like, we'll keep pushing it.
Yeah.
And then you put that money towards it. But I think it's such an important mindset to have when you go into mentorship, to be an action taker. Because if you go through this whole process and you're not taking action immediately when you leave a mentorship, it feels wasted, and people will like feel disappointed in themselves, feel disappointed in the mentorship if they're not taking action doing it. So we really emphasize that. Obviously you emphasized that in your journey, and you're like, if I'm putting my money into this, I'm doing it.
I didn't have a choice, Em. Like when I spent that, so I worked at that tax firm after Frito-Lay for only 3 months. It was just like a miserable like mental life sucked out of me situation. But in that 3 months, I was able to stack up the cash to pay that mentorship. I was putting like all my bills and all my life basically on credit cards, because I was like, I need cash to be able to do something, right? And so it wasn't really like, I was like, I don't have an option for this not to work. You know, like I just like lost my 9 to 5. So I was now jobless, and just dumped 15 grand to the mentorship, just dumped 6 grand into my first property. So it was kind of like, I don't really have another option for this not to work. I have to figure this out. And I think that like putting in a substantial amount of money down on something like a mentorship really does get you in that mindset of like, wow, I have another, like this has to work. Like I have to take action. I have to make this work, at least for me, because coming off at $15,000 for me was quite literally almost everything I had saved up to my name. Right? There was no other pot. My family's not rich. Like there wasn't another, I dumped everything I had. And so I don't know, there's something to say for someone that can do that one and then, take action, because out of those, I think there was like 11 other people in that mentorship that month. I followed up with all of them recently. And I think there's only like one other person that is still doing, real estate or Airbnb. And I'm like, hell, like how did y'all I need to do what y'all are doing, because if y'all could just dump 15K towards something and just like not take action behind it, I mean, other things in life happen, but you got to be an action taker for sure.
Yeah. Well, and that was such a mindset shift for us too. It was like when we hired John earlier this year as our kind of first paid mentor, and he was talking through, I was like, look, like, like when you're asking us to mentor other people, like why is the price high? Why are people willing to pay these prices for this thing? Like just not understanding mentorship as a whole. Yeah. And John said one line that he says I've heard him say it probably 100 more times. He says, those who pay attention. And that for me just stuck. It was like, okay, you just took literally every single dollar I have. I just put all of my chips on you, which is unlike entrepreneurs, right? We always want to put all of our chips on ourselves.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, like you eat broccoli, I eat broccoli. You go to sleep at 8 p.m., I go to sleep at 8 p.m. Like you tell me to do something, I'm doing something. Like I'm committing to this because I don't have any choice but not to. Like I have no other money to spend on anything else, to pay attention to anything else. Yeah. You have my full attention. And I was like, it just was like a light bulb moment for me. Yeah. And I think people willing to pay for it oftentimes have the grit to actually go do it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's crazy to think that it's something I love that. People who pay attention. I love that. And also like it's almost like, there's another saying, I don't know how to quote it exactly, but it's like, taking action is like the biggest differentiating factor between the people that make it and the people that don't make it. Like if you just take action, taking action is the hardest part of anything. If you take action, there will be some type of like success or learning story or something to some degree, right? Most people fall short and end up not taking action. And so heck, that just like put a little confidence. I'm like, okay, so all I got to do is show up. Okay, now that became harder to do, right? But that's why you surround yourself with people who, I mean, you and I have had some pretty vulnerable calls, where I'm like, yo, like I'm struggling. Like I need someone to help, like I'm struggling to show up. I'm struggling to take action. I need someone to kick my ass, to tell me what I don't want to hear, right? So
it truly is the first step. I think that's the hardest. And like, it's not even maybe the task that's the hardest. It's choosing to do that first task that's the hardest.
Yeah. Thing. I agree. I'm setting up, like, I just started using Price Labs and some like automation systems to help take some of those daily monotonous tasks off of my plate that I do every day for the Airbnb portfolio. And it's like, now that I've done it, I'm like, that literally was so easy, but it was just so daunting of a task to do. I am not tech based, and I thought I was gonna have to like do all this like coding and integration, and it was just doing it. But I put it off for a long time. Like I told Sarah, like I've put off doing these things that would help alleviate so much like stress and daily just like off my plate. Now that it's done, I'm like, geez, could have saved myself. Like I could have done that months ago. Why didn't I do that months ago?
Yeah, Sarah and I had that conversation recently when we were setting up our properties, and I was like, some of the tasks that I have to do will literally take me 15 minutes, but I cannot get myself to do it. And then I do it and I'm like, why the hell did I not just do that 15-minute task?
Why?
Like there's no point in not doing it. And then you do it and you're like, okay, going forward, that's just like a thing that's on my checklist that I'm doing from now on. And it makes it so much easier.
I don't know. I don't have an answer as to why we're like that. Like, why do we put off things that are just like not? It's not even like, well, putting off things that are like daunting, I can understand. But yeah, things that are like not, they're just like, dude, like why? That took such little amount of time. Someone called me when I was in Yellowstone and wanted me to like come out and see a portfolio of Airbnbs that they have in North Houston. I literally just called that person back yesterday. And he was like, Lauren, I called you on August 30th. And I was like, I'm so sorry. Like, it's literally on my to-do list since you called me. And it's like, dang, Lauren, like you lost the business with someone because why? Why couldn't you just have texted or called them back 3 weeks ago? You know, it's those little things that you just I don't know why we put those things off.
I'm so guilty of it though, too. That is some not talked about enough sauce where I'm just like, the weight of carrying something, I'll carry that weight, like that mental weight for like 3 months of something that will take me 3 hours to do. If I would just sit down and like take the 3 hours, learn the thing, eat the frog, like, and it is that discipline, right? It's like, you know, you carry that in all aspects of your life. You carry that to work out every single day. You carry that to make good eating choices. You carry that to be a good significant other, and then also to be a good business owner. It's like, you have to be uncomfortable all the time. You have to be willing to be disciplined about it and just swallow the frog and just like go through those motions. But that's so much easier said than done. And especially when you're carrying it all yourself, like, how do you prioritize what to do? What's going to move the needle? How to like alleviate some of that mental weight? Like that's just the reality of it. So you not calling people back, I'm like, I have a text message in my phone right now that I've just been avoiding for the last 2 weeks. And I'm like, I just need to listen to the audio message and reply to the thing. But I can't.
That's a whole nother podcast if it's like life and why that, like the struggles. The struggles. Why?
The struggles.
I have no idea.
I'm glad everyone struggles with it though. It's not just us. Okay, so for our listeners, if they listen to this and they're like, oh my gosh, resonate with this girl so much, where can they find you to continue consuming your content and follow your journey?
Sure. I don't know about you guys, but Instagram has become more of like the preferred communication platform for me. I communicate on Instagram more than I do like text messages, unless I'm calling someone, which I like to talk on the phone. Right? Instagram is my preferred method. So you can just reach out to me. My Instagram is my full name, Lauren Sedlar, Sedlar. And I'm very responsive on there. So that's the preferred chatting method. And I do like a lot of daily posting of just like the reality of life and the struggles of life. I have a big thing on, you know, keeping things honest and just real. Right. And so you'll see that if you follow me on Instagram.
Yes, and we will make sure to tag Lauren's Instagram handle below the audio version and video version of this episode. Lauren is kind of a hype woman too, so she makes you feel really good about yourself. So, and I feel like that's just like a fun conversation. I'm constantly going through and reading the DMs between you and Sarah because it just makes me feel better.
That's why when she said flirting, I was like, that was literally the perfect word. Like, I have been like, I love you guys, you know, and that doesn't happen enough, right? People don't tell each other enough. Like, hey, you're the shit. Like, I like everything about you. Like, I like the gold jewelry you wear, you know, literally. When I put on these gold earrings, I'm like, I feel like I'm being Sarah right now. I mean, it's cheap gold stuff, but it's what I wear. And I know you wear gold jewelry as well. It's just little things where I just hype each other up, like make each other. It's those little bitty compliments that people just don't give enough. They take no time, right? Just like, I like you. I like
Yes.
Honestly.
Well, and it's like now we get to control the community that we keep, right? If we're out of the 9 to 5, then we get to like pick and choose our coworkers.
right.
And that's what I use Instagram for. I'm like constantly sliding into people's DMs being like, "How you doing? Pay attention to me." Well, thank you so much for coming on. This has been such a great episode. For all of you listeners, if you want to follow Lauren, please do. Highly encourage it. As you know, our main form of communication is Instagram. That's why we connected so well with Lauren. So just appreciate you and all that you're doing. And of course, all of her stuff will be tagged below. And for all of you listeners, thank you for consuming another episode. We will catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye.